Hello everybody, I'm Coach Tickety, and today we're going to talk about why you're losing your fights in Overwatch 2, whether that's a one-on-one duel or a full-blown team fight. I'm going to be talking about what I think are some of the biggest contributors to those situations, and of course talking about how we can fix them. If you like this type of content and you want to see more of it, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you're looking for more ways to improve your gameplay, then you should head over to GameLeap.com. Over on the website, you will find hundreds of guides made by top-level coaches, with more being added every single week that'll cover everything you want to know about Overwatch 2, from the basics, from pure fundamentals to in-depth, step-by-step character guides, and even some in-depth coach-led VOD reviews. So if you're serious about improving and you really want to rank up this season, then you should check out the link below this video or just head over to GameLeap.com and get your membership started today. I spend a good amount of my time working as a private coach for players just like yourself, coming in from every rank, every role, and the most common question I get asked in those settings is, why did we lose this fight? Now, this usually has a pretty complicated answer. Of course, Overwatch is a pretty complicated game, but for today, we're going to try and keep it simple, and I'm going to give you my go-to answers to that question, some of the most common things that I see players doing, even sometimes unknowingly, that are causing them to lose fights. The first and most common reason as to why you're losing fights is having a weak position. Now, individually, this is a fairly simple problem to address. You need to make sure that you as an individual are always safe. You need to have good natural cover and you're not surrounded by enemies and things like that. You need to make sure that your positioning benefits the range of your weapon, so you're not too close or too far away from your opponents in order to do the maximum amount of damage or healing. And you need to be able to play effectively around important map geometry like high grounds, flank routes, choke points, and corners. And for an individual, again, this is fairly simple to do. You just need to make sure that against any targets you're fighting, you have that kind of positional advantage over them. But when we move into team play, into a 5 versus 5 setting, this becomes harder to address because there's so many things going on at the same time, and you might unknowingly be exposing yourself to other targets rather than just the one you're focusing on. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You're on the attack and you're trying to take a first point on a map like King's Row or Gibraltar or Dorado, any of these maps with relevant high grounds around the objective that are hard to deal with when you're sitting on the objective yourself. A lot of players think to themselves, well, the objective is here and I see the enemy tank near the objective, so maybe if I just put all my pressure into them, we'll end up pushing the payload or capping the point, and then we win the fight that way. By committing to a fight this way, we basically give up any potential to actively pressure enemy backliners like those DPS and supports who are using those high grounds. And assuming that they are using the high grounds, we'll basically fall victim to any damage or cooldowns they use with no counterplay potential. To prevent this from happening to you and your team, you should first prioritize an anchored position that's as strong, if not stronger, than the enemy team's before you decide to commit all in around the objective. This means if the enemy team has high ground or better angles around the objective, we also need to get onto the high ground and get our own angles around the objective, or we need to force them off of the high ground and corral them into the objective itself first. And when I say anchored position, what I mean by that is that we need our most vulnerable player on our team to be able to play in that position safely. So for example, if we're playing with a backline support like Zenyatta, a very vulnerable member of our team, we need to make sure that before we decide to go all in on that fight, our Zen is in that position with that high ground, with that strong angle, and he's able to stay there for the duration of the fight. The next reason you're probably losing fights is because you're not respecting enemy advantages. Now, advantages are fairly complicated in a game like Overwatch 2, so we're going to try and keep it to the biggest, most obvious ones that you should always be responding to, and those are numbers advantages and the advantages of active ultimates or major abilities. There are a ton of other types of advantages in the game as well. We've already talked about one, positional advantage, which you should also try and react to, but start big and then work smaller later on. So a numbers advantage happens when the enemy team has more players alive than your team does. Pretty simple, and you can react to this just based off the kill feed, if nothing else, if it's not happening directly in front of you. And ultimate or ability advantages are relevant for as long as those ultimates or abilities are on the field. The easiest way to respect an enemy's advantage is simply to not fight them when that advantage is active. So if you notice a couple teammates go down early in a fight, you should probably start backing up. Or if the enemy supports start using their ultimates, they're probably going to be pretty unkillable. I have seen so many players running into fights not respecting these advantages, and of course 99% of the time they end up back in the spawn room before anyone else. Now, these probably seem pretty obvious, right? You're not going to try and run in fighting 1v5, and you probably shouldn't be putting all your damage into that Nano to Risa who's never going to die. Of course not. But like I said, you should start big here and then eventually work smaller. So some ways to push your knowledge around advantages further is to recognize that advantages don't last forever. If you back up and play safe after a numbers disadvantage, you'll be able to 1. Regroup faster with your teammates, but also 2. You might find opportunities to punish over-aggressive enemies who make some mistakes of their own. And if you play slower and safer after an important ability is used from the enemy team, say something like Baptiste Immortality Field, then you'll be able to outlast that ability and go in when he has it on cooldown and won't be able to use it defensively anymore. And of course, that will go double for even more important abilities in the form of ultimates. And speaking of which, the next mistake I see people doing that causes them to lose fights is mismanaging their ultimates. And typically what this means is that they are expecting way too much value from their ultimate ability. Now, there are a few ultimates in the game that are pretty easy to read in terms of what value they're going to find. For example, Tracer's Pulse Bomb. You're either going to find a kill or two, or you're not. Simple as that. But there are so many other ultimates in the game that require at least some degree of follow-up in order to find real value in the form of eliminations. For example, tanks like Reinhardt or Zarya have hugely explosive ultimates that have a ton of playmaking potential built into them, but if there's no follow-up damage, it's basically like that ult never happened. Expecting too much value from these ultimates can not only cause you to waste the ultimate ability, but also cause you to overextend and potentially end up feeding your life when you were trying to make a play for your team. So to avoid this problem, just make sure you're not over-expecting value from your ultimates and you're able to play safe even if it does go wrong. And this is especially relevant if the enemy team has strong defensive ultimates like Lucio's Sound Barrier or Zen's Transcendence. The next reason you're losing fights is, quite simply put, tunnel vision. And what this usually looks like is getting aggressive all by yourself. This happens when players, especially DPS players to be honest, find a target they want to get aggressive on and decide to go for it, not taking into account all the outside factors that can contribute to that fight. Even if you find a strong advantage over your target, it doesn't mean that you have an advantage in the fight unless you've taken into account all the outside variables. You need to know if your teammates are with you and if they can support your play, and you need to know as much as you possibly can about the rest of the enemy team so that you don't accidentally walk into too many threats that you can't deal with. The best way to remedy this problem is to stop putting so much attention into your enemies. Don't only look at their positions and when they're vulnerable and when you can go aggressive, and start paying more attention to your teammates when they're in position, when they can get aggressive with their cooldowns and things like that. You might even notice a couple teammates getting aggressive themselves that you can go and support instead of trying to force your own play every single time. Playing this way guarantees more synergy across you and your teammates, since you'll at least know your teammates are around whenever you decide to get aggressive, and it'll give you more time to read the situation, slow down your play a little bit, and start reading into those advantages we talked about. Just try to keep in mind that this is a 5 versus 5 team game. You can't just force every play you want to make. You should instead be looking for the plays you should be making. The next reason I see players losing fights is not respecting hero matchups, and this can mean individually when you're taking fights as like a duel, or it can even mean team-wide compositional matchups. Every single hero in Overwatch 2 is very complex in their design and what they can do in a game, and there are simply way too many different hero matchups to break them all down in a video like this. But to break it down in a bit of a nutshell that's definitely oversimplifying things, there is a bit of a rock, paper, scissors matchup between long-range poke heroes, short-range brawl heroes, and high mobility burst heroes. Let's imagine 3 DPS like Tracer, Hanzo, and Torbjorn. Torbjorn's great in short range and at brawling, Hanzo's great at long range at poking, and Tracer's got that high mobility. Hanzo with his range will be able to out-poke Torbjorn, and therefore Torbjorn will have a hard time fighting him anytime they're outside of very close range. Someone like Tracer with all her mobility has no problem getting on top of Hanzo and probably is able to out-duel him using her blinks to avoid his damage. But if Tracer tries that same playstyle against a Torbjorn, she won't be able to outlast him since he's innately tankier and has defensive cooldowns in the form of overload, not to mention his turret. Trying to force a fight that goes against the natural advantage that one hero has over another is not recommended, and more often than not will end up with you losing that trade. And I should clarify that this doesn't mean that you will never find yourself fighting these heroes, it's just that you should leverage some other kind of advantage first before you decide to go all in. So for example, Tracer can absolutely kill Torbjorn, but maybe you should wait till his turret's broken and maybe after he's used overload before you commit to that assassination attempt. And this same logic applies to full-on team compositions as well. Do you think your team is better at brawling in close range? Are they better at poking in long range? Or are they better at setting up dive attempts with mobility? When trying to read into which team is better at what, try to look at the DPS line first, since where damage comes from is typically what defines a composition. If you're going up against a combination of Reaper and Mei, maybe you should try playing some more long-range pokey heroes instead of committing to that dive. Or if you're going up against Tracer and Sombra, maybe you should try focusing on more survivability instead of trying to pick snipers like Widowmaker or Hanzo. In any case, respecting these hero and composition matchups doesn't always need to mean a swap of your own hero choice, but it should at least help you decide which types of playstyles will be more beneficial to you and your teammates. Overwatch is a very complicated game, which can make it fairly hard to determine exactly why you're losing these fights in your matches, but overall, it also makes it one of the most fun games to learn and to play, in my opinion. I hope the advice in this video helps you identify what might be going wrong, maybe answers a few questions you had about some previous games you played, and if not, you can always head over to GameLeap.com for some more answers. Don't forget that over on the site there's hundreds of videos for you to explore that cover everything you will need to know about the game. So if you're feeling really stuck and you just can't figure out what's going wrong in your games, then maybe the guides or in-depth hero courses available on our website can help offer a new perspective that might just blow your mind. So click that link below the video or head over to GameLeap.com and get your membership started today. Anyway, that's all for me today, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.